Hello, welcome to Creativity Boost podcast. Today I'm super excited because we're going to be talking about a very important and captivating topic. We're going to be talking about how to validate your ideas. Have you ever had an idea but you're not sure if to proceed with that idea? Have you ever had an idea and you went about pursuing that idea only to find out that you had no business pursuing that idea in the first place? Today I have on the show Kim, a CEO and entrepreneur with pedigree, who's going to join me as we unpack this conversation. Hi Kim, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely, I'm super excited to have you on. I don't know if you'd like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself as we proceed in this conversation.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Kim Kelly, and I am the CEO and co-founder of People Work. I'm a two-time entrepreneur as well as a seasoned executive, and in both roles in my life, I've been able to apply a lot of ideas, some good, not so good, and some of my stories today might help your audience understand how to know which ones maybe to proceed with and maybe some that maybe they should keep to themselves.
All right. Wow, that makes sense because I've had people who venture into things that they find out at the end of the day they had no business pursuing it. It's just like someone climbing a ladder and getting to the top and then figuring out at the end of the day that he climbed the wrong building. So this is something I believe is really profound for creatives out there, people who have creative ideas. So what do you think? Why do you think it is important to validate one's ideas? And what does it even mean to validate an idea as a creative?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with what does it mean, and then I'll talk about how to. So what does it mean to validate? It's that you're looking for external signs that what your idea is a good one and can grow or apply to the community around you. What you don't want to do is have a lot of good ideas that are always good ideas. I'm sure there's fabulous quotes everywhere about having. There's not a lack of ideas. There's a lack of execution, and that's really, the best wisdom that probably could apply to this entire conversation. And then there's a difference between ideas that are good ideas because they're in your world, and like an idea for me that fits with my life, that satisfies something that I'm striving for, that totally works. But maybe an idea, my same idea, if I were to give it to you, you'd be like, no, that doesn't work for me. I don't even that's not even my thing, right? So ideas that need to be validated have two sides to it. Are you validating it because you want to grow your idea and you want to see if it works to the world around you? Or are you just looking to test out an idea that would benefit yourself? Fair?
That's interesting. So what do you have to say about the concept of, testing an idea? Many people feel like if you really have an idea, then you should just run with it and execute fast, right? You mentioned how that there's a lack of execution in many creatives, and that's why they are not creative as far as I'm concerned. So I've seen many creatives use the whole idea of validating their idea as an excuse to stay in a spot and not move and not execute. They call it analysis paralysis. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think that goes back to the first part of your first question, which is how do you validate? I think the design of the how goes to your goals, and totally get analysis paralysis. And with creative minds, there's this fine line as well of perfection versus process. So what I would recommend before you design your how is to determine your why. If your why for validation is to constantly evolve a theory, then keep evolving it, keep iterating it. You're going to go through versions A, B, C, all the way through to double Z, whatever your versions are, right? because that's your goal and you know that from the beginning. But if your goal is to take a concept, whether it's a piece of art that you have designed, or whether it's something that you've engineered, or whether it's just a simple process modification that would apply to business, what is the goal with that particular idea and concept? Is it because you want to sell it? Well, if you want to sell it, then you first have to go up to a stranger and see if they're going to buy it. Like, don't ever go to your mom, don't ever go to your brothers and sisters, don't go to your best friend, because they'll all buy. They love you, right? They're invested in you. Go to a stranger who has nothing vested in you and say, would you buy this? And not just get a yes from them, but get the money from them. Because if your why is to sell, everybody says yes until they have to write the check. But once they write the check, then you're validated. But if your why is to see if you have broad adoption of the work that you're doing, well, then your how would be, are you sharing it on different social platforms or different networking sites where you would get that kind of validation? So define your why so that you can define your how.
Wow, that's really profound. So what do you have to say about the concept of reaching out to people and asking people if they would like an idea that you're working on, and they tell you, oh yes, and then you go work on that idea and then you put it out there and these same people do not buy? So how do you know for certain that this idea is not just a fluke? How do you know that this thing is actually going to work? Do you just have to depend on people's yeses, or what?
Well, I think that I'll tell you two stories that happened on both instances of my career. So as an entrepreneur, when I started my first company, it was very specific. Like, it was a product that had a specific buyer that I knew when it would sell and how it would sell. So there was not a lot of guesswork in it. Like, the idea was in the package, but there wasn't really anything that I had to kind of test to see if a customer would buy it. I just had to find the right customer. This company, PeopleWork, changes so many things in our working world and our education system, and it kind of flips the whole model on its head. And when you talk to people about what it is that I do, they're always like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And then I will say, did you become a customer? And they'll say, oh no, I couldn't. And this is why. And so accepting ideas and buying into ideas are two totally separate things. So if your why is to make money, then your how is, how do I convert my idea into cash? And that's going to make you kind of go like all over the place with your idea. But if your why is to get validation that it's a good idea, well, I've got to tell you already, I'll just like, what do you say? I'll get rid of the suspense. Your idea is a good idea. There's very few people in the world that'll say your idea sucks, because most people are trying to be trying to be very polite. Most people are trying to are like conflict avoidance. So even if they said no, they wouldn't want to hear what you had to say back. So taking a yes for validation, yeah, everyone's validated, magic wand. But why, if you really are doing something for the purposes of getting cash, your only measure of validation is cash.
Okay, so how would you recommend that a creative go about that process of getting people to buy into their idea enough to part away with their monies? Because, like you have established, anyone can be polite with their words and tell you a yes, but almost no one will be polite with their hard-earned money except they have a reason to part away with it. So how can we ascertain that there's a strong pull in our idea that would get people to happily give you their monies, happily give you their credit cards and say, take my money?
Well, I guess let me first start off by setting some expectations. It's never easy to get people's money. And when we say that, this isn't a how do I become the next snake oil salesman? This is really about how do you take an idea and turn it into commerce? And I don't want anybody to think that when I say that, this is like, oh, how do you kind of hustle for your cash? Well, hustle in the sense of you're going to work hard to get every dollar you get is very true. That's just the fact. In 2024, everybody's a solopreneur, everybody's this entrepreneur, everybody's got their own side hustle. So everybody's out there kind of scrambling for getting some sort of cash validation consumption into whether it's a good idea or bad idea, it doesn't matter. They're just trying to get the cash, right? So we're now past the how do you validate an idea, but how do I just create commerce for my idea? So the expectation I'm setting before I answer anything else is that it's a grind. It's not easy. And that's just because there's so many people out there. There's so many different options. There's so many different voices. There's so many, there was somebody that said, I think it was Neil Patel, who said that there are over 1.6 billion pieces of new content on the internet a day. Like, how do you get through that kind of noise? Like, how you have it with your podcast, it's content, right? And you're trying to say, well, how do I get my idea, which is this conversation? You're selling a concept of a conversation that's worth listening to. And how do you break through all of that noise? So all of that being said, I'm going to rewind now to say you have to know your customer. And one of the things that I always hear, because I get asked to speak to other entrepreneurs from time to time, and they always say, well, my product can be useful for everyone. I started that way. My product can be useful for everyone. Well, bad idea, because I don't have the budget of Microsoft. I can't just put a bunch of advertising that goes through that 1 billion pieces of content or messaging a day. So what I had to do, and it wasn't easy, and it goes through practice, is being very specific about your customer. And first, just talking to them, which essentially is what you're getting to do just by luxury of your podcast, right? You're just generating conversation, which sometimes conversation creates value. And so the old adage, the whole key of human relationships, it's actually more important more than ever. Most people think that in order for me to get traction in the world, I'm just going to have to market, and send a bunch of emails and do a bunch of text messages. And the interesting part about what's happening right now with just human purchasing behavior is that I want to know you. And that, unfortunately, takes some time. So people who are thinking that they're going to take their idea, they're going to get validation that it's a good concept, and then they're going to, if their goal is to get cash, that they're going to get that right away. No, it's not. It's not going to happen that way. But you can make it work as long as you know the details of your real customer, the one who's willing to purchase, the one who sees value in what you're doing, and that you're willing to put in the time.
Wow, that's amazing. You really blew my mind with your response, because you touched many interconnected parts about how that you create desire with conversations, how that you have to talk to your customers, you have to talk to them to actually know if this thing that you have in your mind would be valuable to them. And the thing is that many creatives are in a hurry. The chills that comes with having this idea, there's this emotion, this drive that comes with boom, an idea, that aha moment. Sometimes creatives are tempted to run off with that initial energy without actually gaining the momentum that they need, which will be received from getting feedback, getting attention from the desired customer, or for the intended client. So you really said some really profound things, and that brings me to what I want to ask you next. Now, there's the concept of getting people to pay attention, right? Some people feel like if you can get someone in the midst of the distraction in the internet, if you can get someone to pay attention to your content or pay attention to your idea or to your concept for 7 hours, then you can actually get that person to buy into your ideas. Now, is that concept true? Does paying attention end up turning into paying cash?
Well, let me go back to something else you said before I answer that question. And how you started your response was about that passion that gets inside of you. When people ask me about why I became an entrepreneur, I say I really didn't have a choice. It was genetics. I call entrepreneurism for me a sort of disease because it's not an easy journey. There's nothing about taking an idea, whether you're using it to be an entrepreneur, which is building an enterprise, or you're trying to take your solo concept and just make a stable living for yourself, or just catch ideas on fire. Like there's this whole range of things. But when that passion gets you, you're kind of out of luck because your just human desire is going to want to, how do I satisfy that passion? And one of the young ladies I got to meet, she's about 20 years old, and she does nails. And she does like art stuff, like very detailed, intricate art stuff on nails. And she said, I want to build my own retail location. And I said, okay. Well, what are you doing right now for income? How's your revenue? What's your client base? This young lady is bringing in $145,000 a year, and she's doing nails out of her home. There's nothing illegal about that. She can do that in her home. And I said, why in the world would you want the cost of a retail location? And her response to me was, I had a passion. I had the vision. And I told her, I said, right now you're not making a wise business decision. And if you're going to pursue the passion over the goal, then you know that you might be setting yourself up for destruction. And that's a big lesson to learn about taking an idea and figuring out what you want to do with it, and then kind of managing that passion that incited it in the first place. It's a very hard, balance to take. But now answering your question, is it really that whole like if somebody listens to your content 7 times, 7 hours, that magic number of 7, I don't think is true anymore. And this is something I always, I tell a lot of people is, do you know wherever you live, do you know your tax policies that are impacting your income? Do you know yours? If I were to say how much increase in home taxes are you paying, would you know the answer to that?
I'm not so much of the numbers guy.
Okay, but my point is, taxes impact our livelihood so much. Like every day, how much we have for disposable cash, how much we get to invest in our dreams, we still don't pay attention. And in order for us to get something like a 7-click rule, if something like taxes, people don't care about, but it impacts their life, their whole entire livelihood, and nobody cares. It's not that nobody cares. It's just kind of like we kind of accept it. It is what it is. Maybe I can't change it. I don't know. But I just want to put that into perspective. If what was going on in the biggest impact of our lives we very rarely pay attention to, for any other opportunity to get heard at 7 clicks is probably not realistic. And just to give you an example of my metric for my company, it takes about 10 to 12 clicks before somebody, and we say clicks, it means somebody maybe listened to my YouTube channel, somebody maybe would have engaged with one of our events, somebody before they actually become a customer. Now, mine is a little different because we're doing so many new things. I do expect it to take a little bit longer, just that's change management. But I don't think anymore, that 7 clicks, 7 hours, seven whatevers, I don't think it's true anymore. I think it's much more than that.
Okay, so what would be your definition, or what do you think is the required duration or attention span that would get someone into buying into your idea enough to give you that validation that you need as a creative?
Well, actually, I'm going to challenge you back. Why do you want somebody that doesn't want to pay attention to you? In that whole span, when people say, and people have said this to me for a long time. They're like, you have to, because Google tells us that you have to write content at a second grade level, and that you have to do things within 3 seconds or nobody's going to pay attention to you. Well, if your customer is reading at a second grade level and your customer is only scrolling for whatever 3 seconds, well, then yeah, you're going to have to do that. My customers don't do that. My customers are looking for a certain level of intellectual content. They're looking for problem and solution fit for different things that are happening in their life. They're not spending the statistical, 3 seconds, whatever. And I had to learn that. So I was hearing, okay, I got to get something out fast, and I got to push this very simple message out. And yes, you do have to be simple, and you do have to communicate value as fast as you can. But if your customer isn't that customer, don't create content for that customer. Going back to, if your customer for your podcast is somebody who is an ideator, well, you need to find out where those ideators are, and ideators are typically not like just quick scrollers. They're like, let me listen to this concept. I don't know. Let me debate that concept, right? So I don't even know I don't know that much about your target customer, but I'm just saying, don't make content for your customers that aren't your customers.
Okay, now can we also unpack the idea of seeking external validation being a limitation? I'm also of the opinion that sometimes it pays to just give your idea a chance to live before even bothering yourself about, oh, will I become a millionaire with this idea? Oh, will I become the next Bill Gates with this idea? Sometimes I feel it pays to just create for the joy of creating, and if it turns out to be $1 million brand at the end of the day, then beautiful. So what do you have to say about that?
I love it, because you said two things. You said, I'm going to create goals and set expectations for myself about why I'm doing this, why I'm pursuing this idea. And I think that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that the hard part that comes, and when people get angst, and this is just my 2 cents, people get nervous, energy, and anxiety when they set the bar so high for themselves that it causes the failure. I think that's where the fine line is. And I just go back to saying, figure out your why. And if your why is, I just like this process, I don't have to live off of this process until, or if I can, fabulous. You set the goal for yourself, and you're able to execute your ideas without stress in a way that almost degrades the quality of your idea, right? Because if you were stressed or you were pushing something, you might talk to me differently. You know what I mean? Like it might impact the quality of you actually executing your idea and pursuing that validation.
So what do you have to say about people who they have ideas, but they don't believe that it's an idea that's worth pursuing, right? People around them believe that they have an idea, accept them, or maybe they become discouraged because they were not getting the kind of feedback they were getting, but all they needed may have just been a little tweak here and there. For example, I met someone, and he told me he had this idea. He had built an app for like 2 years, and it was just a project he had archived, and I was like, wow, this is amazing, this is wonderful, this is going to solve a real problem. Why haven't you put this out there? And I said, well, maybe it's not worth my time, well, maybe it's not worth anybody's time, well, no company wants to partner with me, I need just this one endorsement from this big company, and all the big companies, I've reached out to 50 companies, and they don't want to partner with me, and so I don't even believe that this idea is valid, but I believed it was valid. And after taking him through a series of inspiring and motivating and coaching, he spent 2 months and he implemented the ideas I gave him. He launched that app, and in 2 months he was generating a revenue of at least $23,000. Now,
That's cool.
why do people? What do you have to say about people like that who they do not believe their ideas are valid, even though it's actually valid, even though people outside think it's valid, even though the market is screaming for it, somehow they don't know. What do you have to say about that?
Well, actually, I think you answered the question for me. Where people, when people decide not to pursue an idea, it could be because they just didn't know the next step, which you, with your friend, you gave them the next step. Or maybe it was that they don't have a, I'm going to answer this a little. Do you know, I always say, do you have the shame gene? You know, there's a families will, some families will push the shame gene on you. Like, don't do this. You can't do that. It's not okay. You got to stay in your lane or do what you need to do. And then you have other friends that are outside of that circle that are trying to get you past that. Like, don't be ashamed. Let's try it. And it's not necessarily shame as like, I'm feeling horrible about myself. It's just shame as like, how and when do I push my confidence without falling on my face? Right? That's really what we're talking about. In the instance with your friend, you might have been the one to help him do both, tell him next step and give him confidence to reduce the shame gene coming out, right? But then there's other people that also just like the idea stage. They don't want to do all the work after that. They just want to participate in the brainstorming part to it. They like the ideation and they're probably not going to ever execute. And that's okay too, as long as you know that. If you're having conversations and you say, oh, well, I really want to do this, and then 5 years later you're still saying I really want to do this, then your friend should be like, not sure if you really wanted to do it. So I think you just have to figure out where you're at.
Yeah, and I think at this point of our conversation, it would make sense if we can actually define what an idea is, because I believe many people have a lot of ideas about what an idea is that could actually be misleading. So what do you think? What would you say is an idea?
Sometimes it's a fleeting thought of creativity. That's really what it is. It's just it's something that happens in your brain in a moment, I guess. That's how I've never really been asked that question outside of a Webster's dictionary definition. But my quick answer is that.
Now, during one of your initial responses, you said something about when you're trying to validate an idea, don't ask your mother, don't ask your brother to buy because they will buy because they love you. What about scenarios where even your mother and your brothers and your family don't buy into the idea, and who knows, that idea may actually have a chance? What do you have to say to that?
So the question is, I just want to make sure I heard you right, is you had the idea, you tried to sell it, and nobody bought. And it's a good idea.
Your family, your family who otherwise should be in the mode of just.
Oh, your family didn't buy it, your friends didn't buy it.
Yeah.
Well, my first question would be, are they your target customer? Because that's if your family and friends don't buy because they know that your product or service or idea is not for them, respect them for that. Because if they're giving you feedback, if they're buying it and they're not your customers and they're just doing it out of love, I mean, appreciate the cash, but don't necessarily respect what they gave you because they didn't give you really a good, secure business signal that your product would be something that others would buy. So that's, yeah. Actually, when I launched my first business, I knew that none of my family was a customer. They were not my target customer. And most of the time they think I'm crazy anyways, because I'm doing all of these ideas. And it's okay. I didn't go to them because, one, my business wouldn't have thrived off of a family of 20, right? It would thrive off of much more than that. And I knew they weren't my customer, and that's okay.
Yeah. Cool. And you've made such a profound point, and I like the fact that our conversation got to this point, because many people go to the wrong sources when trying to validate their ideas. they go to the people who they have no business even having that conversation with when trying to validate their ideas. You have a product that you think would solve a problem for the market, and instead of going to the market or going to the ideal person who should be getting the solution, you're going to a friend or a family or a spouse that maybe cares, maybe loves you, but don't really love the idea that you're investing your time and resources into. So, and then when they give you a feedback that you don't like, you take that feedback you've gotten from the wrong source, you take that and then you allow that to define your creativity, and you hold yourself back because you're validating your idea the wrong way. So I really appreciate that response, because you have to really ask yourself, this person, this mother of mine, father, brother, sister, wife, husband, is this person actually my ideal client, my ideal target? If this person is not your ideal client or target market, and the person buys just to make you happy, that person is not even doing you a favor. The person is doing you a disservice. As harsh as that sounds, that is what it is. So if you're listening to this and you feel like, oh, nobody wants to endorse me, oh, my family is not supportive of me, oh, my sister, my mother, my spouse does not buy into my idea, even though I'm trying to garner their support, maybe that's a feedback. That's them telling you they are not your ideal client, and that's a very positive feedback in my own estimation, that you should take with joy and appreciation as you move on to get those who your solution or who your ideas are really meant to serve. Yeah. So what do you have to say about the whole process of validating an idea? Should there be a time frame? Should there be a time box around this phase of validation? Because like I said initially, a lot of people use the whole concept of validation to stay stuck and not move on. So what do you have to say about the concept of time boxing? And if you believe in that, what's your recommendation around that?
Getting validation and setting it like a time goal.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah. Well, two things. There's what is it, Steve Martin? Do you know the comedian Steve Martin?
Not exactly.
Okay, so the comedian Steve Martin, he's a pretty popular American comedian. He has a special on Apple, and it's a documentary of his life. When I watched it, I was floored. I mean, he's definitely a creative. He said at the beginning, he's like, I just knew I wanted to be on stage, but I had no talent. So fine. He's just like, I'm going to be on stage, but I have no talent. Fast forward, it took him 15 years before he actually was validated in the circle of being a performer. And that meant getting his first sold out stages, actually being paid for his work outside of like $50 for doing a comedy thing, like 15 years. And one of the questions that the interviewer asked him was, why didn't you quit before that? And his response was, I'm just too stupid. I'm just like, maybe I should have quit. I don't know. So time is a tricky thing. Time, how you go about seeking validation and relating it to time, I think has to do with more about what's going on in your life, not just about the idea. Like for me, I knew that I could give 5 to 8 years to validate my business and not be worried about income, not be worried about what it did to my reputation, not be worried about, all of it, not impact my relationship with my family. So it's okay. I kind of set that. And, obviously, you don't want things to take that long sometimes, but I think that's how you make that decision. Now, I say that knowing that every goal, every why. So if you're doing it because your why is to get money and you have no money, you probably should put a short timeline on that because you don't have anything to back up what you're doing. So that's my answer is I think what your time limits go are directly associated to what's going on around you in your life and what you wanted out of that why with your idea.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you know, I believe that this whole validation concept is something that you can't really tie to a time frame. So if you want to go into the journey, it's just about knowing that this thing could go long. So how long are you willing to stay? Like Myron Golden said something. He said he wanted to start a YouTube channel, and he told himself he's going to do this thing consistently for 10 years, even if nobody views it, even if nobody subscribes to it, right? That was him like giving himself a very wide time window. And like you also said, you just told yourself, I can do this for 8 years or more. I don't care if it makes money. I don't care the support I get or I don't get. I'll just keep doing it because that time is going to pass anyway. So as long as my life is not going to end, if I work on this and devote the time and resource that I'm going to devote to it, or as long as I won't go hungry and broke and die suddenly, I think it's worth the effort. I think it's worth the risk, and I think that's a good mentality to have as a creative, and that's why it's always good that as a creative you have something going for you. At least you have something that you can use as a way of sustaining yourself as you bootstrap your idea and get it out there. So I think that's a very profound way of seeing things. Thank you so much for that answer. So what do you have to say about ideas that are executed, but at the end of the day, these ideas were validated and then they were executed, but at the end of the day, they failed?
At the end of the day, they failed?
Yes.
Oh.
Is validation a guarantee that an idea will succeed?
I would say, well, the best example of a very significant awkward failure is WeWork. Have you ever heard of the co-working space WeWork?
No.
Okay, it's another documentary. I'm a documentary nerd. So next, he had a good concept, right connections, all the money in the world, but he was a fraud. He failed because he was a fraud. He was way overselling his concept, and he didn't have any financial validation as much as he was letting the market know. So you have like that extreme of, people succeeded, but they didn't really, right? They, like, when you looked under the hood, they really didn't succeed because they didn't follow the natural laws of the way that you have to go through growing an idea into something so successful like that. You have to get your financial validation, you have to get your market validation, and then you have to be able to just pressure test it a little bit more so that you can just do more of that. So failure is really very conditional. I mean, there was another a female entrepreneur who said that you could just do you pick your finger and then you can tell all of the things that are going on with you in the world. She ended up going to jail. Don't know why he did not go to jail, but she did. That's another double standard conversation. But the failure part to it, I mean, it really depends on the person who's executing it and why it actually failed. Because if you did all of that validation that I just said, it probably wouldn't fail.
That's profound. I think we've really been able to unpack these ideas and this conversation. Do you have anything that you'd like to leave for our listeners out there? If there was two things that you would say to a creative who has an idea and who is trying to go on that journey as a creative entrepreneur, what would that be?
My advice to people as they're going through this process: know your why.
That's one. I wanted to.
That's it. I mean, it really is that simple. Know your why. And as long as you always evaluate, is your why your why? You always check. Life changes, the world changes. Yeah. If you're always chasing the right why, then you're going to be on course.
Amazing. So, in validating your idea as a creative, know your why. And Kim has given us like two basic routes that you can take. If your why is to make money with your creative idea, you want some sort of commercial validation, you want some sort of proof that people will buy what you have to sell. And then if you're just doing it for the joy of creating, then you can go the route of just going the long haul, putting yourself out there, putting your work out there, putting your creativity out there, manifesting your gift, and watch it grow and take as much feedback as you can from that process. Either way,
from your customer.
Yep.
Take as much validation from your customer. Your feedback from your customer, not your non-customers, like you were saying, like not your mom who's not your customer.
Yeah, from your ideal customer. So you're seeking that feedback and that validation from your ideal customer, from the market, because the market doesn't know what it wants until it sees it, right? So your job as a creative is to create that thing and dangle it on their faces and see if they'll bite, and that way you'll be able to know, oh, I might as well invest more time and resource in this idea. I believe you've picked one or two insights from this conversation. If you're listening on the other side, I want to say thank you, Kim, for making this happen. It was such a pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate all your perspectives and insights to all the questions that came up in our conversation, and I believe those who are listening on the other side are better for listening to us today. So if you're listening to this and you found some value in what we've said, in all that we've said today, I want you to share this conversation, share this episode, share this podcast with your family, with your friend, or with someone that you believe is a creative person, has an idea, and needs some form of validation to know how to go about that idea. I'd appreciate if you can do that, because that person will be better if they listen to all the profound things that we have said today. So thank you once again for tuning into this episode. I'm going to see you in my next episode. Until then, have a good one. Bye-bye.